Have you ever thought about thought? Well, now you're thinking about thought. And don't think about that, or else you'll start thinking about thought. And you'll be trapped in an endless, eternal cycle. But today we're thinking about what is a thought made of? That's the question we're going to answer today. And in looking at what is a thought made of, we're going to look at existence and the universe as well. Because you can't understand what a thought is without understanding what existence is. Because as we begin to unpack all of this, we're going to see that existence is thought, and thought is existence. We're going to break this down and look at this mathematically, logically, and rationally. No mysticism, woo-woo, faith, or any of that kind of thing. We're going to be taking a look at this through the lens of logic and reason. So I hope you're excited, because it's going to be a good one. We are talking about what is thought. And to understand what a thought is, we have to understand what existence is. Because as we're going to see, existence and thought are intimately related. You can't have one without the other. And so to begin our inquiry to what a thought is, we have to think about how we're going to think about thought. And to think about how we're going to think about thought, we are going to use reason. So it's important to understand that we are going to follow what is known as the principle of sufficient reason. And the principle of sufficient reason is an extremely basic principle. It just means that everything that exists, well, it has some sort of reason for why it exists in the particular way that it does. In other words, if you see a ball rolling across the floor, the principle of sufficient reason just says, well, there's some reason that that ball is rolling across the floor. It's because maybe someone kicked it, maybe the wind blew it. What the principle of sufficient reason means is that there has to be some sort of mechanism by which something occurs. The ball isn't just rolling across the floor magically for no reason. In other words, you can't have miracles, you can't have these things that just pop into existence for no reason. So we are going to begin by using reason. That is the faculty that we're going to explore this topic. And right away, if you disagree with the idea that reason reveals answers, well, there's no point in even watching any further or whatnot, because what we want to do is rationally explain existence. And if you deny reason, well, then you're not looking for a rational answer. You're looking for a miracle or something like that. And if you're looking for a miracle or something like that, anything will suffice. It doesn't have to satisfy reason. So we start with reason. That's it. Simply reason. Okay? So we're starting with reason, rationality, and what we're going to do now is go back to the beginning. I want you to think back. Think about before space, before time, before matter, before anything at all, before the Big Bang, before anything. Okay? So now automatically I want you to realize this is a big difference between how mainstream religion begins and how science begins. Mainstream religion does not begin with nothing. It begins with God. But you want to ask, well, what is that God? Who made that God? Or how did that God exist? No, it just starts with God as a given, but has no rational explanation for that God, according to mainstream religion. So mainstream religion begins with God. Scientific materialism begins with the Big Bang. Or if you are, subscribing to some other scientific idea, maybe it begins with random quantum fluctuations or something similar to this. Regardless, science and religion start with something. God, the Big Bang, random quantum fluctuations. We don't want to do that because they haven't been able to give a rational account for how something like that could be. We want to start with nothing at all except for reason. Because that's how we want to find a rational answer to what thought is and what existence is. So right away, we're starting with nothing but reason. So, what do we have? Well, we have nothing at all, and we have reason. So, this is what we have. We have reason, and we have nothing. That's it. You can't get more basic than that. And I want you to realize that if we weren't using reason, we could start anywhere we liked. We could say, oh, well, and then there was a dragon, or and then there was an alien, or and then there was a god, or and then there was a quantum random fluctuation. And it could be, if we're not using reason, it could literally be anything at all. But we're using reason. And reason, we're going to start from nothing. So we have nothing and we have reason. So let's begin to really start to unpack this. What can we do with nothing and reason? Well, we're going to start to rationally explore this. And we're going to have nothing that is equal to 0. All right, so if we want to mathematically model nothing, well, that is equal to 0. 0 is nothingness. Nothingness is 0. Rationally, we know that 0 is nothing. So now we have reason, we have nothing, we have 0. What can we do with this? And just bear with me, go with this, because we are going to see how this becomes and how we can understand what thought is and what existence is by following this line of reasoning. And by the way, I also want to mention that we are on a limited amount of time. So what I am showing you right now is a very simplified form of an argument. If you want the full argument, you need to study ontological mathematics in detail, but this is a simplified version of this to kind of get, your teeth wet. Is that a saying? Get your teeth wet? I don't think it is. Cut your teeth. Cut your teeth and get your feet wet. Get your feet wet and cut your teeth. Don't get your teeth wet. I don't know why you're getting your teeth wet. Anyway, so we have reason, we have nothing, and this is equivalent to 0. So you can see so far we're not making any radical moves, and we're not going, and then there was God, or and then there was a quantum fluctuation. We're not doing anything like that. Okay? We just have reason, nothing, which is 0. So continuing to unpack this by using reason, we can take a closer look at 0 and understand that 0 is also equal to so we have 0 equals 1 minus 1. And that should not be, that should be obvious. 0 is equal to 1 minus 1. So you can see how we're beginning to unpack things. We have reason, we have nothing, which is equivalent to 0, and we know that 0 is equal to 1 minus 1. We haven't made any jumps, we haven't made any leaps. We know that this is true. Now the question is, what can we do with this? What can we do with, we know now that 0 is equivalent to a unity of opposites. That's what 1 is. 1, we have a positive 1 and we have a negative 1. So what is 0? 0 is a unity of opposites. But we know that 0 can take on many different structures. 0 isn't limited to just 1 minus 1. It's also 2 minus 2, 3 minus 3, 4 minus 4, 5 minus 5. And not even these simplistic ideas, but there are, an infinite number of ways that you can express 0. 0 can be infinitely complex as long as every positive value is perfectly paired with a negative value. So basically what we want to do is explore the structure of 0, which is the structure of nothingness, and see if we can't, find, using reason, any sort of ideas that will help us understand existence. So right away now we have reason and nothing and 0, and we have now discovered that 0, using reason, we have discovered that 0 is a unity of opposites. Now the question becomes, where can we go from there? Well, we have to ask ourselves, how are these opposites structured? And what we're going to find here is, let's take a look at this. Let's lose a different color. So, if we have, let me see if you can see this on the screen. It's a little blurry. I'm sorry. Let me adjust this to see if I can make it a little more clear. Am I blurry now? No, that's better, right? Okay. Okay, so we have now we want to ask, how is this structured? Well, I want you to look at a number line. Okay. So if you've seen a number line before. If you have 0, okay. Well, then you'd have 1 over here and -1 over here. Okay. So basically what we're doing is we are seeing how these values are structured. I want to emphasize that there is no space, okay? I'm not saying that there exists some space and there are actual numbers that are a certain distance away from each other. This right here is just a helpful way for us to visualize an idea. And what is the idea that we're trying to visualize? How these values, which is 0, how 0 is structured. Right now, this is just pure information. It's pure relation. Think of it like a code. So if you think of a computer code, a programming code, that programming code, the code doesn't have actual distance, but information can still be ordered and structured. Certain information can come before or after, logically, not temporally, but logically. So this is what we're trying to get an idea here, is how is the information structured logically, not spatially, not distance-wise or temporally, but with regard to information. So we have -1, which is opposed to +1. And we want to ask ourselves now, well, are there any other numbers that we can include in this? And what we have to now include are imaginary numbers, okay? And the reason why we have to include imaginary numbers is because what we want to do is include every possible way that 0 can be rationally constructed. And 0 can be rationally constructed with 1 minus 1, but there is another kind of number called I. And I is, it's just simply another, it's short for the imaginary number, okay? And if you aren't familiar with that, that's okay. Just know that imaginary numbers are a type of number that exist in mathematics. I've done a video on them. Check it out if you want. It's called The Imaginary is Real. Imaginary numbers are just another type of number in mathematics, just like negative numbers are a certain type of number, okay? So we want to rationally explore 0. And if things like 1 minus 1 is possible, well, how come we can't include imaginary numbers? Well, there's no reason why we can't. 0 is just a unification of opposites, and there are opposite imaginary numbers. And imaginary numbers lie, if we're using it's called an Argand diagram or a Gaussian plane or a complex plane. But if we're using these number lines to represent how information is structured and ordered, the imaginary unit I would fall here for positive I, and here for negative I. And once again, I just want to say, if some of this is seeming confusing, I'm sure for some of you it is, just go with this for a minute. The thing with this type of information is it doesn't really all make sense and it doesn't click until you get to the very end. Once you get to the end, it'll all click and fit together. It's sort of like if you're putting a puzzle together and you don't know what the picture is yet, and you just go, I know this piece goes here and I know this piece goes here, but what the heck, why am I doing this and what does this make? If this, again, this is kind of what this is like. This will all come together and fit at the end. So right now we're structuring information. We want to see how 0 is structured, and we want to make sure that it includes all possible values that 0 can take on, rationally and logically. We don't want to exclude anything. We don't want to miss anything. We don't want to have a puzzle that's missing some pieces. If we didn't include I, it'd be like a puzzle a puzzle that was missing pieces. So if we're exploring 0, we don't want to be missing any values. And all these values imply each other. So in addition to having real numbers, negative numbers, imaginary numbers, and negative imaginary numbers, there's one other type of number that I want to introduce you to, and these are called complex numbers. And complex numbers are a fusion of imaginary numbers and real numbers. So they're all the numbers. So imaginary numbers fall on this line here, real numbers fall on this line here, and complex numbers are the numbers that fall in between. They're everywhere in between, okay? So if we know that we need real numbers, and we need imaginary numbers, and we need complex numbers, how are we going to order and structure all these numbers together so that they still equal 0? For example, if you had 1 and minus 1, that's fine. That equals 0. But if you have 523 and minus 4, that no longer equals 0. And that would violate the fact that all we have to work with is reason and nothing. And I hope that makes sense. All we have is reason and nothing at all. And then we see that that's equals to 0, and then we're going to unpack that and see that it actually is a container for a structure of information. But do you see how if we were to violate 0, we'd no longer just be working with reason and nothing. We'd have something else. And there'd be no way to account for that something else because all we have to work with is reason and nothing. We don't have a creator God. We don't have random quantum fluctuations. We don't have a mysterious particle. No. We don't have any of that. We just have reason and nothing, which is equivalent to 0. So as we explore 0, we can't violate 0 because then we would have something other than reason and nothing. So we know that 0 is a container of opposites. We know that we need to have real numbers. We know that we need to have imaginary numbers, and we know that we need to have complex numbers. And the question is now, how are those numbers organized and structured logically, not spatially, right? There's no space. It's not like one is actually here and the other is actually here. This is just rational relationship, like a code. Relation, that's all it is, relationship. So how is this structured so that we include real numbers, imaginary numbers, and complex numbers, and so that it doesn't violate 0? Well, we know that imaginary numbers lie on this line, real numbers lie on this line, and complex numbers are all the numbers that lie in between. And so what we do is we get a circle. Okay, so, and the reason why that we get a circle is because, look, all the numbers that lie on the circumference of this circle perfectly balance. At this point here, you have I. At this point here, you have negative I. At this point here, you have 1. At this point here, you have negative 1. There is a complex number here. And guess what? Its opposite is right here. For the complex number that lies right here, there's its opposite that lies right here. So when you structure numbers in this way on the circumference of a circle centered at the origin on a complex plane, you get imaginary numbers, real numbers, and complex numbers all ordered and structured so that it equals 0. Meaning if you added up all the numbers on the circumference of the circle, it would be equal to 0. So now, and remember, this is all information. This is all structured relationship. This is not anything happening spatially or anything like that. It's just organized information. We now have a circle that entails imaginary, complex, and real numbers, both positive and negative, and it's still equal to 0. We still haven't gone anywhere else from reason and nothing, because we have reason, we have nothing, we know that nothing is equal to 0, and we have unpacked this 0 and seen that it is equal to this particular structure. Now, one caveat that I want to mention here is because you notice this circle is of a certain size, a certain amplitude. For example, well, you'd go, well, what about the number 2? Well, right, the number 2 would lie over here, okay? And you go, well, it's not within the circle. Well, if the number 2 were out here, we would have a larger circle. And for the number 3, we'd have an even larger circle, right? So what I want to emphasize here is that reason and nothing, that's all we have. We've unpacked it, and we've gotten this circle. But really, nothingness, 0, is equivalent to a vast multiplicity of circles. Many, 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 a near infinite amount of circles. This one we're looking at right now happens to have an amplitude of 1. But there are many, 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 this nothingness, 0, can contain a vast number of circles, because every single one of those circles still resolves to 0. It never breaks 0. It still resolves to 0. So I want you guys to keep in mind that there are a vast multiplicity of circles, not just one. However, things would start to get really complicated, and what we want to do is just explore one of these circles to understand existence and understand thought. Because we don't need to explore all of them right now, and that would just be way too detailed and way too complex. But I just want you to keep in mind, it's not like there's just one circle. There are many, 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 many of these. But we're just going to look at one of them to start to understand existence. And once again, remember that this circle is structured information. That's what it is. And if that ever seems confusing, just remember that it's kind of like a computer code. A computer code is information structured in a particular way. This circle is information structured in a particular way with these numbers that lie on its circumference. One other thing that I want to say real quick here, and this is for those who may have thought of this. If this doesn't bother you, just ignore this part. But some people might think about, like, okay, but what about a square? We could have done a square, and a square centered at the origin still, if we had a square centered at the origin, I know that's not very well centered, but pretend it is. If we had a square centered at the origin, it would still resolve to 0. So how come our structure is not equivalent to, how come our structure isn't a square? Why is it a circle rather than a square? And that's a great question. And the answer to this, there's actually a lot of different answers to this. But again, to simplify things down real quick, remember, what do we have to work with? Reason and nothing. That's it. This square, this particular arrangement and structure information, it does not violate nothing. It's valid. However, it does violate reason, the principle of sufficient reason. And the reason why it does that, to understand this in sort of a simplified way, is if you're structuring information and arranging information, why would you suddenly, if you're going along structuring the information, why would you suddenly, why would you suddenly make a sharp turn and go this way? Why would some points be further away from the origin from others? On a square, certain points are further from the origin than others. Why? Why? There is no reason that can be provided for us to make a sharp turn or for some points to be further from the origin than others. And because of that, this structure violates reason. Because there is no sufficient reason for certain points to be further away from the origin than others, and there's no sufficient reason for there to be random sharp turns. So it doesn't violate nothing, but it doesn't violate reason. And so we have violated what we started with, and the only thing that we have, which is reason and nothing. This structure does not violate nothing, and it does not violate reason, because all points on the circumference of the circle are equidistant, and there are no random turns or changes in the pattern. Everything is equal and consistent. All points are equidistant from the origin. There's no randomness or arbitrariness involved. And if there is no reason for certain points to be further than others, and if there is no reason for there to be, sudden turns, there won't be. So, this is why we are using this particular structure, because this particular structure is compatible with nothing and compatible with reason. This particular structure is compatible with nothing, but it breaks reason. Remember, this is about what is thought and what is existence. We're getting there, don't worry. Let me get rid of this square here. Okay, so just to recap, we have reason, we have nothing, that's it. We've seen that nothing is equivalent to zero. We want to unpack, see how reason, how zero is structured. We have this structure of information. Now, what is the equation for this structure? Because there is a particular equation associated with this structure. The equation for this structure is e to the ix equals cosine x plus I sine x. This is known as Euler's formula in mainstream mathematics. In Hyperianism, this is known as the source formula. This circle, this structure of information, is equivalent to this formula. And what does this formula say? We're going to take a look at this formula and unpack it. This formula says that e to the ix, which is this circle, is equivalent to cosine x plus sine x. What is cosine x and what is sine x? They are waveforms. That's what cosine x and that is what sine x are. So if we have, let's see, what color I want to use here. All right, so we have that this is essentially what this means, okay? So we have e to the ix, which is basically this, is equal to a cosine wave and a sine wave. So what we have understood here is that we have looked at the structure of nothingness, the structure of 0. We've gotten this circle, and just like we've unpacked 0 to get to this circle, we can now unpack this circle and realize that this circle is the same thing as the unity of two waves, a real cosine wave and an imaginary sine wave. Just like 2 plus 2 equals 4, right? There's two ways of looking at the same thing. 2 plus 2 is 4, but they are expressed in different ways. 2 plus 2 is a way of expressing 4, even though they're the same. This circle is a way of expressing 0, even though they're the same. And this circle is, and these waves are a way of expressing this circle, even though they're the same. So just like 4 is equal to 2 plus 2, this circle, the source formula, is equal to the unity of a cosine wave and a sine wave. And the same thing applies. If you are to add up net the values, the total values of these waves across one cycle, they're still equal to 0. Right? If you were to integrate across these waves, you would see that their values are still equal to 0. So this is all still equivalent. We have not broken anything. We started with nothing at all, except for reason and nothing. We've unpacked 0. We've seen that there's a structure of information. We have seen that it is this formula, and we have seen that it is equal to waveforms. All this we have done without breaking nothingness or reason. And what are these waveforms? These are frequencies. They're all equal to 0. And this is where we are getting to what thought is. Now, starting from nothing at all, nothing and reason, we have arrived at waves which are frequencies. This is what thought is. I'm going to elaborate on this, but thought is frequencies. What are frequencies? It is structured information. It is a relationship, values, information ordered and structured in a certain way so that it doesn't violate 0. All this time, we are dealing with the 0th dimension, which is a mental singularity. It is the 0th dimension. You know, if you're looking at your friend's body has a certain height, depth, length. Their thoughts do not. Their thoughts are 0-dimensional. You cannot take out a ruler and measure their thoughts or anything like this. Their thoughts are in the frequency domain, the zeroth domain, the mental singularity of mind. And thoughts are frequencies, which are a structure of information. They are, which all resolves to zero. So, let me bring up real quick, because a graphic, and I know most of you have seen this a million times, but for those of you that have not, let me bring up a graphic of the source formula, okay? Because it really helps when you can see it in motion. Now I'm noticing that there's some bad glare there, but let me cover it up a bit. Hopefully you guys can all see this okay. But take a look at this. So, if you can see this is that formula. This formula right here, e to the ix equals cosine x plus I sine x. If we want to see, right, and, you know, which is this, the circle and the waves, here you can really visualize it and see it. You can see how these waves, how these frequencies are associated. You can see in the corner here, the green circle, and then the two, sorry, things are mirrored for me on the screen, so it's really hard to know where I'm pointing to. And then the two waves. This is what we're dealing with. This is what we have arrived at. This is frequency, this is thought. And if you're still asking yourself, but wait, what is thought? Thought is information structured in a particular way, mathematical information that resolves to zero. It's not made of anything physical. It's not made of anything material. It is structured information, structured thought, ordered all according to reason, and its net result, its total result, is equal to nothing at all times. So I just want to reiterate the how amazing it is of what we're doing here. Again, if you go to mainstream religion, they don't start with nothing, and they certainly don't start with reason. They start with a creator God. You go to mainstream science, they start with things like the Big Bang or random quantum fluctuations. We are literally starting with nothing and reason. And so far, by unpacking all this, we have arrived at frequencies and a relationship, a structure of information. Okay, so I know when I yell like this, it's because I'm getting excited, but I'm sure that's destroying your ears. I need to get a better microphone that hangs above me so I don't yell directly into it and into your eardrums and destroy your mental faculties in my excitement. But okay, so let's continue here, because there's more to unpack, and this is extremely important. Okay? So we've started with nothing and reason. We've gotten to frequencies. Now remember, we have this structure, and we have these associated with two waveforms. But remember, we have a vast multiplicity of these circles, not just one of them. Because if we just had one, well, we just have one circle and we'd have two waves, and there's not much we could do with that. It would sort of just like we could just have two thoughts. Yeah, you can't do much with two thoughts. But remember that we can have a vast multiplicity of these circles, because every single one of these circles resolves to zero and are valid with nothing and reason. So we have a vast multiplicity of zeros, a vast multiplicity in instances of this equation, which is a vast multiplicity of frequencies. We now have a vast multiplicity of frequencies. So what can we do with a vast multiplicity of frequencies? Which is a vast multiplicity of thought. What we can do with a vast multiplicity of frequencies and a vast multiplicity of thought is construct any physically realizable waveform that we want. Any physically realizable waveform can be constructed from these sinusoidal waves that resolve to zero. And why is that important? Well, with the discoveries of quantum mechanics, we know that reality is based on waves. We can understand reality, existence, and the universe as a complex net of waves, a vast wave function, a universal wave function. So everything around you that seems like it's physical and made of hard particles, we know via delving into quantum mechanics that that is not true. That reality actually is based on waves, the quantum mechanical wave function. And because I can't make this video several hours long, there's a lot I could say about that, but I'm going to gloss over that. If you want more details, check out my book, Ontological Mathematics, The Science of the Future, or Euler's Formula and Special Relativity by Dr. Thomas Stark, both great books. Anyway, I'm having to gloss over some things due to the sake of time. But in a nutshell, due to quantum mechanics, we know, and other things that I don't have time to get into right now, we know that reality is based on waveforms. Via these sinusoidal waves, and having a multiplicity of them, we can construct any waveform at all, no matter how complex, even if it is as complicated as the universe itself. So we can literally construct the universal wave function, the entirety of the universe, via these sinusoids. And this is what's known as Fourier mathematics. Fourier mathematics is the mathematics of sinusoidal waves, the mathematics of waveforms, the mathematics of signal processing. It converts information from frequency information into space-time information. And I'm going to show you a quick visual of this, just to give you a little bit of an idea of what I'm talking about. So if what you're seeing on screen is something known as the Fourier series. And basically what this is showing is how if you have a complicated wave structure, a complicated signal, you can break that signal down into nothing but sine waves. So if you take a look at this, basically what it's saying, let me see if I can make this bigger. Okay, do you see how there's this red wave? There's this red wave, and what Fourier analysis does is it lets you break that wave down into its sine and cosine parts. And you can see these different very, very simple waves are the blue waves. Basically, by adding these blue waves together, which are very simple waves, which are literally these waves right here, by adding these waves together, a vast multiplicity of them, you can construct any physically realizable wave structure imaginable, even if it is complicated as the universe itself. And so what the Fourier transform does is it allows you to transform frequency information into space and time information. So again, what this means, the exciting thing about this, is that still, starting with reason and nothing, and without violating any of these, we get frequencies of thought, frequencies of mind, and by combining them together in a specific way, we can compose and give rise to space and time structures, which are complex waveforms, which are complex thoughts. And if, again, this is a little difficult to understand, a simplistic metaphor that a Hyperion Jan Erickson put forward that I think is really good is they said, well, think about sand and sand castles. And think of the sand as thoughts and think of the sand castles as space and time structures. You can have all these different space and time structures. You can have all these sand castles. Imagine a whole sand castle, sand people, sand cars. But you can break it down into its individual units of sand. Just like any structure in the world. The tree outside, the cup in front of you, via Fourier analysis, can be broken down into these constituent sinusoids, these constituent frequencies, these constituent thoughts. And so reality is realized through, we can give rise to all the universe, all reality, through the combination of these sinusoids. This is literally all we need to construct existence. And going a little bit further than this, I don't have time right now to get into how these frequencies are ordered into units of minds, because in Hyperianism there are a multiplicity of minds or monads, and each one of these minds and monads is a container of frequencies. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to get into that. At some point I probably will, and if you guys want to see that, let me know. Tell me in the comments. But just know that we have individual minds, and then we have a vast and then we have, the collection of all minds together. And these minds, they're just containers of frequencies. That's all they are. So when you go to sleep and dream at night, and you're exploring your dream world, you're exploring your frequencies. And the space-time world that those frequencies, your thoughts, give rise to. Your thoughts, your frequencies, give rise to your inner dream world. This outer world, this external world, is the result of all of our frequencies mixing and interacting together. It's a collective, objective dream. So the outer external world is the space-time Fourier transform of all the frequencies of all the minds. Your dream world, your personal dream world when you go to sleep, is the space-time Fourier projection of your singular particular frequencies associated with your mind. And that's why if you become lucid, you can change and shape your dream, because they're your frequencies to control and change. The objective outer world, you can't change and shape them, because it's all our frequencies together. And your contribution, your frequency contribution, is infinitesimal compared to all the minds contributing to it. So you can't transform the cup in front of you into a bird or an egg or whatever, or a tree, because they're not your frequencies to manipulate and control. It's a collection of all our frequencies interacting together. And that's why the objective world behaves in this stable way. It's not changing rapidly according to our emotions or unconscious, like a private dream world. Our objective world changes in a much slower way because we actually have to make physical change in the world to transform it. Now, I want to see if I have a little bit of time, make sure I have enough time to get into this more. But yes, I believe I do. So there's one more thing that I want to discuss with regard to this, and that is the idea of phase. Okay? Now this is going to start to get a little more complicated, and I'm probably going to have to do a whole video on this topic alone. But let me see if I have time to. Let me see if I have time to do this. Okay? And I'm going to have to go over this fairly quickly. And I'm going to say right away, I'm going to go over this fairly quickly. And I realize this. So if this is a little confusing, this is something that you're just going to have to kind of go with if you're not too familiar with mathematics, abstract mathematics, or ontological mathematics. But I will do another video on this to go into more details if you'd like to see it. So basically, what is happening here is that you can have waveforms associated with all possible phases of this circle. And what are phases? Well, phases are just angles. If you see this angle here, the angle that lies right here, well, that's a 0 degree angle. The angle that lies straight up here, that's a 90 degree angle, or pi over 2 if you're using radians. And then you have all the angles that lie in between, okay? So, if we have waveforms associated with orthogonal phase, and if we are using this circle to model phase, then any waveform that has orthogonal phase will lie on the axes. It will lie here, or here, or here, or here. Orthogonal phase, waves associated with orthogonal phase, will lie on the axes. Now, waves associated with non-orthogonal phase will lie in between the axes. So, let's take a look at, okay, so let's say that we have, let's put out a radius here. Okay, so here is a radius. And what I want to show is that if we see, so if you can see, we want to know how much of the axial waves are contributing to this interaxial wave. This wave associated with this radius lies in between the axes, so it's interaxial. And we want to know so if we look, we can see if we drop a line down from this radius down to the axis, we can see that this much is contributing to it. And if we were to see how much of the vertical axis is contributing to it, we would see that this much is contributing to it. And the reason why this is important to understand is because the waves associated with the axes, they are pure. You'll have a pure sine wave or a pure cosine wave. However, this interaxial wave isn't a pure wave. It is a combination of partial waves. Do you see how it is taking a piece from here and a piece from here? Oops, I just rubbed that out. So the thing to understand is that waves that lie on the axes, they are complete and they are pure. To put it in a simplified way, they're complete. It's either a sine or a cosine, and it's the entire period, the whole thing. When you get an interaxial wave, you can see that it is a combination. And not only is it a combination, but it is a partiality, a fraction. The thing to understand about this is that when you start to introduce phase relations into waveforms, which means when you start to transform thought, it starts to contribute to fractured waveforms, and this is ultimately what gives rise to space and time. Because now you are no longer dealing with pure thought and pure mind, but you are starting to deal with a fractured viewpoint. And the fractured viewpoint is the reality of space and time. Space and time, what space and time is a fractured and limited view. Your senses, what your senses do, their job is to filter out excess information, and they give you only a small piece of reality. Do you see all of reality all at once? No, you don't. Do you see the entirety of the electromagnetic spectrum? No, you don't. You see only a tiny fraction of the electromagnetic spectrum, and you only experience a tiny portion of reality. So space and time is associated with partiality, a fractured viewpoint. And so you can see that when we start to introduce phase into waveforms, into thoughts, it essentially, to put things in a simplified way, give rise to a fractured view, because you see we are now using this wave is now a combination of two other fractured waves, curtailed waves. And so to put things in simplified terms, this wave associated with this radii here, this radius, this wave is still mind, but we can look at a fractured viewpoint of this wave, and this fractured viewpoint is what our senses tune into. Now I'm going to say something real quick here, and if you haven't watched any of my videos on Gnosticism, just completely ignore what I'm about to say, because if you don't know the whole context of Gnosticism and this channel, it's probably going to sound kind of weird. But in Gnosticism, we've been talking about, the divine mind of God and Sophia and Yaldabaoth. The divine mind of God is a pure mind that structures itself, and you can sort of imagine it as this unit circle here, as it's structuring itself and ordering information. And Sophia, in our story, in our symbolic metaphorical story, is a part of the divine mind that starts to act out of symmetry. And essentially, we can understand this as sort of like a waveform that exists in the interaxial portion, because Sophia gave birth to the dark, fractured, imperfect god, Yaldabaoth, who was the Lord of Matter. And so you can see how this waveform sort of gives birth to these fractured parts. And hopefully you can even see what I'm talking about here. See if I can zoom in so you can get a better view of all this. So you can see how this waveform that's associated with this radius is equal to this part here plus this part here, okay? Just like 2 plus 2 is equal to 4, this is equal to this plus this. You can just tune in to one or the other. So in story form, if we're talking about Gnosticism, this would sort of be like Sophia, that is still mind, but gives birth to this fractured perspective, which is ultimately going to end up being space, time, and matter. Anyway, if you're new to my channel and that made no sense, watch my videos on Gnosticism, and don't worry, we're all about logic and reason here. When we talk about, Sophia and gods and stuff like that, we're being 100% metaphorical. It's a metaphor, it's a story. We don't think that there's actually, Sophia and Yaldabaoth walking around and stuff like that. So if you're new to this channel, you can completely ignore that part. But just to recap what we have done here, okay, because this is incredibly important, has to do with what thought is and what existence is. We have started with absolutely nothing except reason. And literally nothing, because we just said we started with nothing. So we started with nothing and reason. Using reason, we can know that nothing is equivalent to zero. We can start unpacking zero and realize that zero is a unity of opposites. We can then see, well, how is that unity of opposites structured? We can then see that this unity of opposites is structured into this cyclical form here, and realize that this cyclical form is the only form that's still compatible with the zero and still compatible with reason. This cyclical structure is represented by this formula. This formula shows that this circular structure is equivalent to two waveforms, two frequencies. We know that we have a vast multiplicity of these cyclical structures, which means we have a vast multiplicity of these frequencies, a vast multiplicity of these structures. And via our knowledge of Fourier mathematics, we know that once we have a vast multiplicity of frequencies, we can create any physically realizable wave function in existence, even if it's as complicated as the universe itself, which means from these frequencies, we can literally construct the universe. And by introducing phase relations into these waveforms, a space-time world is a necessary consequence of introducing phase relations into these frequencies. So what we have done, started with reason and nothing, have shown what thought is, that reality is based on thought, and from thought we can construct all the universe, all existence, without ever violating net zero and reason. That's all we need to get everything. So take that, religion and science. Do you see how we are the science of the future? Do you see how this is a new paradigm championed by logic and reason that goes beyond what mainstream religion and mainstream science can even come close to? Now, one thing that I want to really point out here is that even though we're talking about a structure of mathematics, a structure of reason, right, that's like a code. By the way, this is why people think that, do you see, there are a lot of people out there who think that reality is a simulation because they think reality is based on a code. And there's a lot of people who also think, well, that reality is based on mind, that it's a thought, that it's like a dream. But do you see how both are true? Reality is based on a code, but it's not a computer code, and we don't live in a simulation. It's a rational structure of information, and reality is also a dream, because this rational structure of information are frequencies, which is thought, which gives rise to the space-time dream world that we inhabit. Do you see how people are getting close, but they're only getting pieces of the puzzle? This person over here thinks, oh, reality is a simulation and based on a code. This person over here thinks it's a dream. This person over here thinks it's this. It's like, no, you're only looking at pieces. Reality is a mathematical dream of mind. It's a Fourier mental projection of a frequency singularity. And one other thing that I want to point out in looking at all this is to remember that mathematics is alive. Looking at it on a board like this can look very dead. But when you start to, look at it in terms of motion, we can begin to see that when we are talking about ontological mathematics, we aren't talking about dead abstract mathematics. Mathematics, frequency, energy, thought, these are all different words for the same thing. And for every frequency, for every form, comes with it an associated qualia. And a qualia is a quality, a subjective mental content. So you may have a frequency, may have a waveform of a certain mathematical frequency, but you might experience that frequency as blue, or red, or pain, or pleasure, or hot, or cold, or happiness, or sadness, or love, or hate. All of these waveforms and their combinations compared with it a subjective quality, a subjective experience that you experience. So you can know the mathematical form and also experience what that frequency is like. Because you, remember that everything is frequency and everything is mathematics, including you. So you are a mathematical structure, a structure of frequencies, experiencing other frequencies. So when you experience love and hate, happiness, sadness, redness, blueness, sweetness, sourness, pain and pleasure, that is what it is like to be a living mathematical structure, a living mathematical being, experiencing other mathematical frequencies, experiencing other living mathematical structures and frequencies. So this is not a dead mechanical universe. This is not a machine universe. This is a living, pulsing, mathematical, mental organism that has generated a space-time dream world to place itself into, to be able to experience itself and learn about itself and know itself. And when we understand this, when we learn this, we are literally the structure of the universe learning about itself. This is what know thyself means. Know thyself and you will know the universe and the gods. This is what that means. When you start to know this information, you are knowing yourself, because this is what you are, and this world was generated for us to enter in and gain knowledge of ourselves as God, as being the mental structure that generated this reality and then placed itself into. Just like when you go to sleep and dream, you are the master of your dream world, and then go into it and experience it. That's what this world is, except including all the minds in existence except for just yours. And I hope you can see how magnificent this is. Using just reason and nothing, we can understand everything. So I hope you enjoyed this. And this has gone on a bit longer than I expected. There's actually a lot more that I wanted to talk about. If you want to know more, let me know in the comments. And perhaps next week we'll do another video and I'll dive even further into this, because like I said, I wanted to talk about more things. But this went on a lot longer than I had expected. So let me know if you want to see more, and we will explore that next week. If you are watching the replay of this video, make sure that you are subscribed and have the bell notification turned on, because you miss a lot in these replays, such as question and answers, things like that. So make sure you're subscribed so you get to see this when it's live and see all the extra content. Also, I want to give a big shout out to all the Patreon supporters, our top supporters, White Rabbit, John, Jiwon, Rex, and Neruda, and all our other top supporters. If you don't see your name up there, I'm going to update it very, very soon. Most likely in a few days. But thanks a lot. If you want to support my work, make sure you support on Patreon. Best way to support. You'll get access to our secret live streams that we have every single week.